Welcome to the River City Hardball Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Gibson. Always great to visit with Dr. Jacob Evanich from Optimized Physical Therapy and Sports Performance. Jacob, great to visit with you once again. Tonight our topic is Little League elbow, Little League shoulder. I've heard many different variations of that. Explain what that means.
Yeah, so this is something that's kind of dear to me right now because I've been having a lot of guys coming to me towards the end of the summer season, and it's been a long haul between the regular season and now we're into the end of the summer and guys are trying out for the fall ball teams. So we're starting to have a lot of the elbow discomfort and shoulder discomfort kind of come up. But especially when we're looking at some of the little league guys, the little league elbow and the little league shoulder, it's looking into the growth plates of the arm. So those end up fusing up a little bit later in our years. So when we're throwing, we're putting a lot of stress on that shoulder and on that elbow. And over time, if we're doing a lot of it, and a common overuse injury is to irritate those growth plates. One in the upper arm, more towards the shoulder, so that's the little league shoulder, and then one in the actual elbow, so that's little league elbow.
So essentially, we're talking about overuse of the arm, the shoulder, throwing too many pitches. Is that essentially what we're talking about?
Typically, yeah, that's really what it comes down to. So it really is kind of a fatigue and overuse issue. So with the little league elbow, we're finding that about like 20 to 30% of 9 to 12-year-olds will have some kind of overuse injury, which was kind of surprising for me to come over. I mean, that's a pretty big number. Also, when you're looking at guys that age group, baseball is actually ranked second for the amount of injuries that'll keep a guy out over more than a week, which is also, you would think, kind of unexpected, but it is. We're just playing so many games, and yeah, just throwing so much. So these overuse injuries can really rear their head for those guys.
What are some signs that you look for in a little league shoulder or elbow injury?
Yeah, so just some of the general discomfort in the shoulder or the elbow. Once we kind of decipher through if it's a little bit more like a muscle issue or if it could be coming from a little bit something else. So one of the things I'm really looking for is those signs of how much have we been throwing, what time of year we're in, if there has been any kind of like traumatic issue where you landed on your shoulder or something, or if you tell me you just have been throwing a lot and then gradually throughout the year it keeps getting worse and worse. With the elbow, I'm really kind of palpating right on the bone in the middle of the elbow, because that's the one that really gets irritated. We want to make sure we are getting on top of it pretty quick, because over time the more aggravated it gets, the longer it can kind of take to settle down and get back from. Also, if we let it go too long, the worst case scenario is that bone can actually fracture a little bit. That's absolute worst case scenario. So one of the things we had said in previous podcasts was listen to your arm in general. And that's really one of the biggest things with this is if you start having some shoulder discomfort, start having some elbow discomfort, it really is time to, if you are like a little leaguer, I know a lot of parents kind of push kids through, and I know that was my case when I was growing up. But we're finding out that these injuries, if you stop it sooner than later, you will get back pretty quickly, and you'll avert a lot of damage and a lot of rehab that didn't necessarily need to happen. If just when you're having that discomfort, you stop when that's going on, and we kind of get to the issue and slow down a little bit. But that's a big part of the reason why Little League in these last couple of years have put some of those pitching guidelines out there on if you're having a certain amount of pitches, you need to take a certain amount of days off to make sure we're kind of staying away from stuff like this, as well as we're looking at other risk factors for throwing injury, which is basically all of them come back to pretty much fatigue when you really think about it. So I have a really long list, but I'll kind of go over at the end. Basically, all these come back to fatigue in the long run. So pitching velocity, if you're throwing harder, that's just going to put more stress on the shoulder and the elbow in general. So that's one. Another one that's not really necessarily fatigue related, but the taller you are and the heavier you are, once again, the more torque we're going to be putting on the elbow. And they don't even know if a lot of this stuff we're still finding out, which is really cool. And we're just starting to put some of these pieces together in the last decade plus. So it's actually a fun time with this. But if you are taller, your bones are longer. So is that putting a little bit more stress on the elbow too as we're throwing? that's some stuff we have to find out. But pitch counts, the more pitch counts we average in a game or a year, number of warm-up pitches we're throwing, months played per year, games per year, innings per year, playing both pitcher and catcher, pitching when your arm just feels fatigued in general, pitching at showcases, pitching consecutive days, and pitching with multiple teams that overlap in the same season. So you can see the majority of those probably come back to we're playing a lot, we're throwing a lot, so we're just kind of getting tired. And then once the muscles are really tired, it goes back to then that's when our ligaments have to work a little bit harder, and it ends up putting a little bit extra force on our bones too. And the muscles constantly tugging at the bone where those growth plates are. Eventually, it could end up with the something like a little league elbow or little league shoulder.
Yeah, we are talking about an overuse type of injury. So the point is such a good one about listen to your arm. Are you seeing more or less cases of this because of the guidelines that have now been put in place? That you would think that there's less, but is that necessarily the case?
Not necessarily, just because a big thing is we are specializing so much in sports now. So guys aren't taking off the season to play basketball or something or football. They're playing all year round. So that's another risk factor we're seeing, that the general guideline is about if we're playing one sport solely without playing anything else for 8 months or more a year, we're considering that specializing in that sport. So I think that's a reason why some of this stuff is on the rise as well. When it comes to specialization, we're still trying to figure out. It's still a relatively new thing in the last, once again, the last decade or so, really specializing from a young age. So from the guys that we see in the pros now, when we're looking at them, the majority of them actually didn't really specialize. So we're not sold that you necessarily need to do that. The biggest guideline I kind of give, and the majority of the sports medicine world ends up giving, is just be an athlete first. If you're a really good athlete, you'll probably excel at your individualized sport once you do decide to kind of specialize a little bit further down the road. So that's what a lot of the really good players ended up doing, was they didn't specialize until later in high school, or some of them once they got to college. So I think that's something that's really important to think about. But also, if we are specializing, and this hasn't been talked about as much, but if we're specializing and all we're doing is playing in the games, then what kind of training are we getting on the side too to try to combat some of those overuse injuries, which goes back to things like getting on an arm care program. So I know lifting heavy weights when we're younger, yeah, we're not going to be lifting, we're not going to have an 8-year-old squatting 200 pounds, it's just not necessary. We need to get his movement a little bit better. But if we have a younger kid, 10, 12, that's throwing a lot, that's okay to get on an arm care program, because we are using that arm so much. So we need to make sure those muscles do stay strong and don't get fatigued, and we maintain all that throughout a season. So
if your young athlete has a case of little league elbow or shoulder, what does the treatment plan look like?
A lot of it is to stop throwing. So immediately, if you're having that, and we end up confirming it on an x-ray is what we end up doing. So go to your doctor, get an x-ray, and they'll actually see that growth plate is actually irritated a little bit. And then in some cases, if it's really aggravated, there could be some shifting of that piece of the bone a little bit. So first things first, stop throwing. Second, it is good to get rehab to make sure that we don't lose any motion in the elbow, because sometimes the elbow is really, for example, like with the little league's elbow, they can be really painful. So maybe we don't straighten out our elbow as much. And then over time, because we're kind of holding that elbow in a position that doesn't allow the muscles to fully stretch, we can lose a little bit of the movement in that elbow. So when we go back to throwing, we don't have the full movement immediately, which we need to make sure that we're decreasing injury risk again. But so just making sure we're maintaining that full range of motion, whether it is with a sports medicine specialist or just on your own with stretches. And then also double checking the full kinetic chain. So a lot of times, some of the risk factors for this, for the little league elbow and for the little league shoulder, is poor throwing mechanics. So we need to make sure your full kinetic chain is really working well together. As we've talked before on this, we generate the force from the ground, and we're using our entire body to throw, and we need good mechanics to throw efficiently. So that's one of the things you really need to look at too, and see if there's other things while we're resting our arm that we need to work on with our body to make sure we're moving in a way that decreases the risk of that happening and decrease the forces on our shoulder as much as possible.
Yeah, it's something that you may not think about all the time, which is proper mechanics leading to a potential injury. It's a good point.
Yeah.
Dr. Jacob Evanich from Optimized Physical Therapy and Sports Performance here with us on River City Hardball. A few more minutes here with you tonight on Little League shoulder and elbow. Do you see a typical age group that deals with this more than others?
Yeah, so you're looking at, with the Little League elbow, you're looking more age group 8 to 12 or so, or 8 to 14. When we're looking at more of the shoulder, that typically can affect people a little bit longer. So we're looking more to between 8 and 16 years old. So whenever a guy's coming to me between those age groups, and they're complaining of those things, there's another couple tests that we can do to really try to decipher out if that's likely the cause or not. And then we can get the full confirmation with the radiographs, with the x-rays.
What kind of stretching do you have to do to maybe combat or prevent something like this?
Yeah, so forearm stretches, definitely. For the reason we get the Little League elbow is you have, we call it like the flexors of your wrist and the pronators of your wrist. And those are two big muscle groups that are used when we're throwing. So those attach to that spot where that growth plate is and that bone is in the elbow, and the constant tugging and pulling. And if it gets tight, it just keeps increasing the force that's kind of being pulled on that bone. So making sure we're stretching those out with some of your typical forearm stretches. It pretty much looks like what everybody thinks, where you kind of put your hand in your palm and straighten out your elbow fully. So that's a big one. So it's pretty basic stretches, but as long as we're doing them, it can really help in the long run. Same thing with the shoulder. We just need to make sure we're maintaining our full motion. So that comes with kind of the full arm care program, making sure that the muscles are fully activating through your full motion. And also just things, typically we don't stretch the arm too much more with like external rotation where we're torquing our arm back, because we do so much of that with throwing. But we'll do some stretches to try to make sure we do maintain the internal rotation of our arm, because a lot of times we see that really decreases over the course of the season.
All right, I want to show you that I'm learning from our podcast. So to prevent something like this, would it be important to strengthen the shoulder blade muscles?
Okay, there we go. I love it, Gibby. That's huge. That's a huge thing. That's one of the main things that's really missed. A lot of people work the rotator cuff. They'll forget completely about the shoulder blade. So you're spot on, man. You're not going to need me here soon.
This is why we do this stuff. Hey, it's informative stuff. Hey, last few minutes here. Anything that we've missed on our topic tonight?
I really don't think so. I think that's the main thing. I mean, make sure be an athlete first. That's a huge thing that we need to take away. The other thing, as always, listen to your arm. And the other thing is just make sure we're listening. It goes along with listening to your arm, but the fatigue is the biggest thing with these things. So if our muscles are tired, if they're overworked, it's going to lead to breakdown of either the muscles, tendons, or bones. So we just got to make sure we are strong enough first and foremost, but also that we listen to our bodies when we're playing, because it is a long season, especially around here. It's literally year round. So it's fine if you need to take, a couple months off to let your body heal up.
I'll tell you what, that's one of the beauties of living in Florida. If you're a baseball player, you can play all year round. Softball too. It's a great situation for players in both baseball and softball. And really to lead into that, you do work with DBAT training and providing a lot of support for baseball and softball athletes in the area.
Yep, absolutely. So we provide both the physical therapy side of things. If guys are having issues like the elbow pain, shoulder pain, we can assess, get a good idea of what's going on and help guys rehab back to health. Or if you're just looking for overall performance, ways that we can get your body moving a little bit better, we provide the sports performance side of things.
Check them out at optimizeptsport.com on Facebook and on Instagram. Jacob Evanich from Optimized Physical Therapy and Sports Performance. Really great stuff as always. Appreciate your time and look forward to next Wednesday at 7 o'clock.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gaby.